somatic nervous system used acetylcholine to excite skeletal muscles, but the motor neurons that did this were called cholinergic neurons due to their association with acetylcholine. And this is still true in the autonomic nervous system. There are cholinergic preganglionic neurons that secrete acetylcholine to excite a postganglionic fiber. There can also be postganglionic fibers secreting acetylcholine to excite our three effectors: cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. In the autonomic nervous system, we have another type of neuron called an adrenergic neuron. These neurons, they secrete norepinephrine and sometimes even epinephrine. For purposes of simplification, we're just going to keep talking about norepinephrine since its release is in so much more abundance than epinephrine. Here comes the complicated part. There are postganglionic neurons that can secrete both acetylcholine and norepinephrine. And these are called pain in the butt neurons. I'm kidding. There's no specific name that I know of. They're just neurons that can do both. Acetylcholine and norepinephrine are the primary neurotransmitters of the autonomic nervous system, but their actions depend on the receptors present in the postganglionic fibers and the target organs. You can release all the neurotransmitters you want, but if there's no receptors, nothing's going to happen. There are two types of receptors that can respond to acetylcholine attaching to them. We have already discussed nicotinic receptors. Those are the receptors that are present at neuromuscular junctions. They're also present at every single synapse between a preganglionic and a postganglionic fiber. They are at every single synapse in the sympathetic chain ganglia and collateral ganglia. They always excite. They're always on. They're always pumping out acetylcholine. Unfortunately, the autonomic nervous system also uses muscarinic receptors. And muscarinic receptors can cause excitation or inhibition. Depends on the organ. Muscarinic receptors are located on cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands, those three effectors of the autonomic nervous system. When acetylcholine comes into contact with a muscarinic receptor, let's say on cardiac muscle, the cardiac muscle cells are inhibited from increasing their rate of action potential. Inhibition. This could slow the heart rate, but it could also just prevent the heart rate from increasing. When acetylcholine connects to muscarinic receptors on smooth muscle, it excites that smooth muscle to contract. The new player in the game is norepinephrine, and norepinephrine is secreted by adrenergic neurons. We could also say that norepinephrine is secreted by all sympathetic postganglionic fibers. Your epinephrine is never secreted by a preganglionic fiber, ever, in either division. Only acetylcholine is secreted ever between a pre and a postganglionic fiber because it is the job of any preganglionic fiber to excite the postganglionic fiber, therefore making the only appropriate and always excitatory neurotransmitter acetylcholine the appropriate choice. This is different than adrenergic neurons, which are present in the sympathetic nervous system. So this leaves norepinephrine to be secreted by every adrenergic, sympathetic, postganglionic fiber. Right? The sympathetic nervous system can have adrenergic or cholinergic. As with any neurotransmitter, you can release all the neurotransmitter you want into that synapse, but its effect is determined by the receptors that are present on the target cell. Adrenergic receptors have tons of classes and subclasses. And we can consider two types of these receptors, which are called alpha and beta. Alpha receptors are mostly excitatory, causing depolarization in the cell that they're on. These receptors, alpha, are pretty much on every single cardiac and smooth muscle cell that you have, except for the smooth muscle in your GI tract. As we know, the GI tract in the enteric nervous system is like its own entity. All right, so those are alpha receptors present on every single cardiac and smooth muscle. There are also beta receptors, which are mostly inhibitory, but they can be excitatory. For example, when norepinephrine is released in response to you perceiving that there's a threat, norepinephrine circulates throughout your whole body. And any organ with beta receptors, such as the trachea, can make the connection between your norepinephrine and beta receptor. So, the effect of norepinephrine on the trachea is to inhibit it from contracting, right? That inhibition allows you to increase the diameter or dilate your trachea and take in larger breaths as you run away from whatever the threat is. In contrast, beta receptors on your heart produce an excitatory effect. So when norepinephrine connects to the beta receptors on your heart, norepinephrine will increase your heart rate. And this is why many people who suffer from high blood pressure or anxiety, they might be prescribed a classification of drugs called beta blockers. Beta blockers sit on the adrenergic receptors on your cardiac and smooth muscle of your blood vessels. And basically, beta blockers prevent your cardiac muscle from increasing in its contraction rate, and they prevent your smooth muscle from contracting and giving you high blood pressure. Are there alpha blockers? Yes. There are also acetylcholine blockers, but these are topics for other mini lectures.